Welcome to the first in a series of interviews we're conducting with researchers from RTPI accredited planning schools about the various research projects they're involved in and why they're important to the planning profession. My name is Jenny Devine and I'm the RTPI's research officer. And this episode features Liz Sharp, Professor of Water and Planning in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at the University of Sheffield. Liz was kind enough to answer a few questions for me on her research project entitled Mobilising Adaptation, Governance of Infrastructure through Co-Production. I hope Liz's answers will help us to understand more about the research and its importance to the planning profession and wider society as a whole. Now, the questions we ask Liz appear in writing throughout this video, followed by Liz's verbal responses. And if you would like further information about this research project, then please visit the RTPI website or send an email to research@rtpi.org.uk.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. So just to clarify, yes, we are interested in a domestic water tank programme, but we're actually interested in all sorts of different interventions that individuals and companies can make on private land, so really small scale interventions. So the classic one, as you say, would be a rain tank or water butt, as we'd normally call them in the UK. But equally, we might be talking about rain tank planters. We might be talking about a rain garden where your downpipe goes straight into a soakaway with what my colleague calls sucky-uppy plants, or indeed it might just be that you have a splash pad at the bottom of your downpipe to distribute the water over a lawn or something like that. So what we're looking at really is small-scale interventions to be focused on private land. I think there are three key points. First, the assumption has often been in the past that people don't want to do something on their private land if it doesn't benefit them individually. But our research has really debunked that presumption. It's very clear that if it's not too onerous, people are positively enthusiastic about taking action to help other people and taking action to prevent flooding, a classic case of that. So I think there is real potential for engaging people in domestic flood resilience. Secondly, sustainable drainage of some form or another is possible everywhere. There's no such thing as an unsuitable site or a house where it wouldn't be possible. It's just a question of innovative design and thinking carefully about the needs of the property and the household to ensure it doesn't upset other processes. Third, I think it's important that the perfect should not become the enemy of the good. In the past, there have been some sustainable drainage standards which set a very high bar in terms of the quantity of water that's held back. I mean, of course, it would be ideal if one could hold back all of the water from a particular roof. But actually, half of it is a lot better than none. So I think a point that we really need to stress when we're talking about these small-scale interventions is that anything you can do adds to our collective flood resilience. Don't reject taking action just because it might not be as substantial as somebody wants you to do. Okay, a community-oriented flood resilience approach is about communities and the authorities working collaboratively to manage floodwaters and to working collaboratively to address that really difficult task of managing our environment through the changing climate that we're facing, with more intense rain and probably more droughts as well. In that context, I think the key point is really we need all the mechanisms we can get to handle it. So it's not a question of flood defence or rain tanks. We need both. A further critical point here is that sustainable drainage schemes, including the local household things I'm talking about, they deliver multiple benefits. They don't just help flooding, but they can also address the frequency of pollution and help nature be more resilient to drought. They also, particularly, I guess, things like rain tank planters, they're increasing the extent of green space around your building or within a neighbourhood if it's the public land suds. And therefore they could have an impact improving local mental and physical health. Just, you know, there's a lot of evidence to support the idea that more green things around us helps our health. It's certainly true the current system does not support community-oriented flood resilience very well. This is because there are many different institutions and authorities involved in managing water. At present, those organisations find it hard to collaborate together, let alone to work with the public. I don't think it's, you know, it's a hard question to answer, and I can't in an interview completely reorganise the UK flood and water management system. But what I can suggest perhaps are two positive changes that I think could make a difference today. The first of these is the removal of developers' automatic right to connect new properties to the sewer. If instead of that being an automatic right, there was a need to negotiate it, then it kind of opens the possibility for the water companies and indeed for the local authorities to have more control over what goes into the sewer and to say, look, if you put another housing development on this sewer, it's going to flood. And at the moment, they've got limited ability to do that. So we're very hopeful that the government will finally bring in this change, which they talked about, been talking about since 2010. But we're very hopeful they'll bring in that change during 2023. The second point is really about helping us all to recognise the important role of surface water management and how the threat of surface water flooding and pollution is a threat that we all face together, you know, really as a consequence of the changing climate. And rather than just thinking of it as something that the authorities will deal with, a recognition that we can all take action to contribute to that. I don't think that awareness is there at the moment. I don't think that's our fault. I mean, I don't think it's the fault of members of the public. The information just isn't out there. I feel like the government could really do something to give a body a responsibility and a small amount of funding to create a national campaign around information about how does surface water flooding work, what can we all do to prevent it. That would make a big difference. And in particular, you know, I'm conscious that many of my students are really concerned about climate change. They have a certain existential worry about it. The more we can show that we're working together to take action to adapt to that changing climate, the more it becomes something where we can do things, we have agency, we can help prepare, rather than just a terrifying future prospect. I certainly agree that the total shortage of resources is an issue, and in a sense it's all part of the process of limited funding that's been available to infrastructure projects over the last 50 years, and in particular the limited funding that's been spent on drainage and sewers and sustainable drainage in the current context. So yes, I would call for more money to be spent on those things, but I think that's not my only concern. I would also say that one of the challenges for the authorities at the moment is that while they may really, the people within them may be very committed to a green, sustainable drainage approach to managing surface water, their funding streams don't always support them in doing that. So, for example, at least until very recently, the funding that the regulator Ofwat provided to water companies was utterly oriented to how many properties are saved from flooding by a particular intervention. But it made it harder for local authorities to spend the money in ways which was perhaps creating biodiversity rather than the cheapest way of preventing flooding. I think it's really important that we recognise that sustainable drainage achieves multiple public sector goals. So, as I've said earlier, the flooding, pollution, drought, and greening. And we need to ensure that wherever the funding comes from, it supports all of those happening together, rather than forcing people to provide the cheapest drainage, which doesn't do the full multiple benefits it could do. So while I think the Treasury is right to protect taxpayers' money and to be careful that we're efficient in the way we spend it, a little bit more flexibility to enable multiple goals to be achieved would deliver much more benefit to public well-being than the narrow benefit-focused approach that's been taken in the past. In the more immediate term, I think more success in planning and building sustainable drainage could be achieved by local authorities and water companies planning and working together. In the research we've done in the MAGIC project, we've been focused in Hull and East Riding, where there's been a unique partnership between two local authorities, the Environment Agency and the water company, Yorkshire Water. And that's been a very productive partnership. I mean, not always a simple one, but productive. And I think that sort of partnership has to be happening in other localities in order that the specific local challenges can be addressed. Over and above the input of the authorities, I also think that the challenge of surface water management actually creates a great opportunity for community groups and wildlife organisations. As I argued earlier, private people in their gardens, their homes, the places they work in can actually do something quite significant in terms of putting in something to hold the water back, some sort of rain garden to infiltrate the water locally or something like that, which can make a difference if we all do it. These organisations could be really important in providing information about how those things can be built and in promoting a level of knowledge and enthusiasm so we can all support each other in making changes in the spaces we live in. Yes, okay, the key outcomes I'm looking for, I think I'd like to flag two. The first would be more informed negotiation between developers and planners about fitting SUDs in new housing developments. This comment relates to a report that we're expecting to produce in January, where we juxtapose the findings of interviews with housing developers with the understandings of some sustainable drainage experts. And it's quite interesting because the housing developers certainly argue that they're doing everything they can to promote the best sustainable drainage they can, and that the constraints of local authorities' planning processes and water companies' permission processes are very onerous, according to the developers, whereas the sustainable drainage experts feel that the housing developers are not pushing the boundaries of the sorts of sustainable drainage they can have on a site hard enough, that they're tending just to always create a pond rather than pushing to look at other sorts of sustainable drainage trains or other features that could actually possibly take less land and be more attractive and do more for biodiversity. So there's a really interesting contrast between these two approaches, and I'm hoping that by bringing them together in a report, we can promote a conversation and learning between those two perspectives and move forward to a much clearer, even playing field that everybody wants, so that developers and planning authorities know what they're doing. The second area where I'm looking for a big outcome concerns really that role of the public and of us all as individuals in helping to contribute to flood resilience. Up to now, that's really been an unseen possibility. I would like it to be seen. I would like it to be recognised and supported and promoted by all of those organisations. Specifically, I would like to see a set of voluntary groups concerned with nature working together to support us all in holding back the water in our private spaces.